I refused to translate for my wife because she won't put any effort into learning sign language. Now she's furious because she wants to hear the family gossip. My father lost his hearing when he was 5 years old due to meningitis. By the time I was born, BSL was the primary language of our household. I learned to sign before I could even properly speak English. When I met Sarah 12 years ago, I told her about my dad on our third date. She smiled and said, "That's so incredible." I should have paid more attention to the fact that she never once asked me to teach her a single sign. We got married 4 years later. My dad walked me down the aisle because my mother had passed away when I was 20. At the reception, Sarah gave a beautiful speech thanking everyone for being there. My dad sat there smiling, at not understanding a single word his new daughter-in-law was saying about his own son. I translated the entire thing into his palm under the table. That became our standard routine. Every holiday, every birthday, every Sunday dinner at my childhood home, I'd sit between them and sign everything Sarah said, then speak everything my dad signed back. For 9 years, I acted as a human bridge. Sarah never complained, and honestly, neither did I. I told myself she was just busy. She had her career, her tennis club, her painting classes every Wednesday. Learning a new language is a massive undertaking. I made excuses for her because I loved her. Then, 8 months ago, something shifted. I started volunteering at the community center on Tuesday and Thursday evenings in teaching basic sign language to hearing adults who wanted to connect with their deaf relatives or colleagues. The irony was painful. That's where I met Marcus. Marcus was 35, deaf from birth, and incredibly sharp. We became fast friends. He'd come over on weekends to watch the match, and we'd sign for hours about everything: work, life, politics, and relationships. Sarah hated it. At first, she just seemed awkward. She'd sit on the far end of the sofa scrolling through her phone while Marcus and I talked. Then she started finding reasons to leave the room. Eventually, she started picking fights with me after he'd gone home. "It's disrespectful," she snapped one night. "You're having full conversations right in front of me, and I have no idea what's being said." I asked her if she wanted me to translate. She rolled her eyes. "Ace, I shouldn't have to ask. You should just do it automatically." Something broke in me that night. I thought about my dad sitting through nearly a decade of family dinners, waiting patiently while I translated snippets of conversations he should have been part of naturally. He never once complained. He never once made anyone feel like a burden. I told Sarah I wouldn't be translating for Marcus anymore. She was livid. She claimed I was choosing a friend over her and that I was keeping secrets in her own home. "You've had 12 years to learn," I said. "My mom learned the basics in 4 months. She wasn't even dating my dad yet. She just wanted to be able to talk to him." Sarah didn't speak to me for a week after that. Here's where the drama comes in. Last month, my dad had a health scare, chest pains and breathing issues, and I rushed to the hospital and stayed with him for 3 days. Marcus came to visit, and the three of us talked for hours in that room. Me, my dad, and the first real friend I'd had in years who could communicate with my father directly. They diagnosed him with a heart condition, serious but manageable with surgery. When I got home, Sarah asked what happened. I gave her the medical basics, but that wasn't what she really wanted. See, while I was at the hospital, my aunt had visited, and she is the family's biggest gossip. She told my dad right in front of Marcus about my cousin's messy divorce, the hidden bank accounts, and the custody battle that was about to turn into a war. Sarah found out from another relative that there was huge news in the family, and she wanted the details. I refused to tell her. "You want to know the gossip?" I said. "Learn to sign. Call my dad yourself. Have an actual conversation with your father-in-law for the first time in 12 years. She accused me of being petty and of weaponizing my father's handicap against her. That word, handicap, it was the final straw. My father isn't handicapped. He communicates in a different language, a language my wife never respected enough to learn, a language she viewed as a chore rather than a connection. I thought about my mom again, how she used to tell me about the first time she signed "I love you" to my dad and got the hand placement slightly wrong, how they both laughed until they cried in the middle of a park. Sarah never wanted that. She wanted convenience. She wanted me to do the work so she wouldn't have to. Last week I told her I wanted a separation. She cried and promised she'd finally learn. She downloaded 3 different learning apps right in front of me like that would fix 12 years of indifference. I told her it was a decade too late. My dad doesn't know the full story yet. I'm going to tell him this weekend. The silence in our house has changed. It used to be a comfortable, shared silence, the kind where I'd be reading and she'd be painting, and the only sound was the occasional scratch of a brush or the turning of a page. Now the silence feels heavy, like it's filled with all the words I've spent 12 years repeating for her. I spent the evening packing a small bag. It felt surreal, pulling shirts out of the closet we'd shared since we bought this place 5 years ago. I kept looking at the framed photo on the nightstand, us at the beach, Sarah laughing, me looking at the camera. I remember that day. I'd spent 20 minutes explaining to my dad over FaceTime what the water felt like, and Sarah had just stood there waiting for me to finish so we could go get ice cream. She hadn't even waved at him. When she came into the bedroom and saw the bag, she didn't scream. She just sat on the edge of the bed and watched me. "Is this really because I didn't learn BSL?" she asked, her voice small. "You're ending a 12-year relationship because of a language barrier that you've managed perfectly fine until now?" I stopped folding a pair of jeans. I looked at her, really looked at her, and realized she still didn't get it. "It's not about the language, Sarah. It's about the fact that my father is the most important person in my life, and to you, he's a prop. He's someone you smile at while you wait for me to tell you what he's saying. You've treated him like a TV show with no subtitles for over a decade." "I have a life," she flared up, her eyes snapping. "I have a demanding job. I have responsibilities. I can't just pick up a complex language because it makes you feel better. I was there for him. I went to every dinner. I bought him gifts. I was a good daughter-in-law." "You weren't there," I said, my voice dropping an octave. "You were physically present. My mom, she didn't just pick it up. She stayed up until 2 a.m. with flashcards because she was desperate to know what he thought about the world. She wanted to know his jokes, his frustrations, his memories of being a kid. You just wanted the highlights. You wanted the family gossip because it's entertaining. You don't want the man. You want the information." She stood up and paced the small space between the bed and the dresser. "And Marcus, what about him? You've been different since you met him. You come home and you're distant. You have this secret world with him that I'm excluded from." "It's not a secret world. It's just a world," I shouted, the frustration finally boiling over. "It's only a secret to you because you refuse to open your eyes. Marcus talks to me. He challenges me. And when he met my dad, he didn't look at me to translate. He just looked at Dad. Do you have any idea how much that meant to him? To be seen, to be spoken to directly in his own home?" Sarah went quiet. She looked at the floor. The apps she'd downloaded earlier probably still sitting on the home screen of her phone, untouched. The next morning, and I drove to my dad's house. It's a small, semi-detached place in a quiet suburb of London. It smells like old books, cedarwood, and the specific herbal tea he's been drinking since I was a kid. When I walked in, he was sitting at the kitchen table, a glass of water and his heart medication laid out in a neat row. He looked up, his face breaking into that wide, crinkly-eyed smile that always makes me feel like I'm 10 years old again. Coffee? He signed, his movements slow but precise. Yes, please. I signed back. I watched him move around the kitchen. He's 70 now, and the heart scare has taken some of the brightness out of his step, but his hands are still steady. As he handed me the mug, he caught the look on my face. He's always been able to read me better than anyone. Where is Sarah? He signed, tilting his head. I took a deep breath. This was the moment. I'd spent years protecting him from the reality of our marriage. I'd polished Sarah's words, made her sound warmer than she was, added please and thank you where she'd forgotten them. I'd curated a version of her for him because I wanted him to feel loved. Sarah and I are separating. I signed. My hands felt heavy. He sat back down, his expression shifting from curiosity to a deep, quiet sadness. He didn't ask why right away. He just reached out and put his hand on mine. I am sorry, son, he signed. Is it the hospital? Was it too much? No, Dad. It's been a long time coming. She never learned to talk to you, and I can't be the bridge anymore. I'm tired, and I want to be in a house where the people I love can talk to each other without me standing in the middle. He looked out the window for a long time. The neighbor's cat was stalking something in the garden. Then he looked back at me, and what he signed broke my heart more than the breakup ever could. I knew, he signed. I knew she didn't want to learn. I stopped trying to tell her things years ago. I only spoke to you. I didn't want to make her feel bad that she didn't understand. I stared at him. You knew, I whispered aloud, before remembering to sign it. You knew? She looks at her phone when I sign, he replied. She looks at the wall. It is okay. Not everyone wants to learn the hands, but I am sad for you. You tried very hard to make it work. The realization that my father had been protecting me while I thought I was protecting him was overwhelming. He'd sat through 12 years of dinners, feeling the exclusion, noticing the lack of effort, and he'd stayed silent so I wouldn't have to choose. He'd let himself be sidelined in his own family to keep my marriage peaceful. I stayed with him all day. We didn't talk much after that, just sat in the living room watching an old film with the subtitles on. Marcus stopped by in the afternoon with some groceries. He didn't ask about the bags in my car. He just walked in, signed a joke to my dad about the hospital food, and started making a salad. Watching them interact, the way Marcus waited for Dad to finish a thought, the way they debated the best way to prune the roses in the garden, it felt like a weight was being lifted. This was what I wanted, this simple, direct connection. When I eventually went back to the house to get the rest of my things, Sarah was waiting in the kitchen. She had a notebook out. She'd written, "Hello, how are you?" and "My name is Sarah," in shaky printed letters next to diagrams of hand shapes she'd printed off the internet. "Look," she said, her voice cracking. "I'm doing it. I've been practicing all afternoon. See, this is H and this is E." I looked at the paper. It was the alphabet, the very first thing you learn. "Sarah," I said softly, "it's been 12 years. You're showing me the alphabet now because you're losing your house and your husband. You're not doing it for my dad. You're doing it for yourself." "That's not fair," she cried. "I'm trying. Why can't you just give me a chance?" "I gave you 4,383 chances," I said. "One for every day we've been together. You didn't take a single one until the door was hitting you on the way out." I picked up my suitcase. I thought about the gossip my aunt had told, the messy details of a cousin's life. Sarah still wanted to know. Even now, with her marriage crumbling, I could see the curiosity in her eyes. She wanted the in. She wanted the secret. "The cousin," she whispered as I walked toward the door. "What happened with the bank accounts? Just tell me that. We're still family, aren't we?" I didn't turn around. I just walked out to the car, the silence of the street feeling more like freedom than I ever thought possible. I'm staying at a small flat near the community center for now. It's sparse, but it's mine. Tonight, I'm going back to my dad's. We're going to order pizza, and Marcus is coming over to help him set up a new tablet for his physical therapy exercises. There won't be any translating. There won't be any bridges to build. We'll just be three people talking with our hands. Finally understood. The following week, the silence of my new flat was interrupted by a flurry of texts from Sarah. They weren't apologies. They were links to BSL YouTube tutorials and screenshots of her streak on a language app. It felt like she was treating my father's life as a level in a video game she suddenly decided to beat because she didn't like losing. I ignored them and went to the community center. Marcus was already there. I setting up chairs for the beginners class. When he saw me, he didn't ask how I was. He just signed, "You look like you slept for 100 years. I feel like I woke up after 100 years." I signed back. We spent the evening teaching 20 hearing adults how to sign basic emotions. Happy, sad, angry, frustrated. I watched a young woman struggle to get the movement for frustrated right, the hand flicking away from the chin, and I realized she had more genuine intent in her eyes after 2 hours than Sarah had shown in 12 years. This stranger wanted to talk to her deaf brother. She wasn't doing it to save a marriage. She was doing it because she gave a damn about his soul. After class, Marcus and I grabbed a pint at a pub near the station. It was one of those old school places, loud and smelling of spilled ale. "Yeah, your wife called me," Marcus signed, setting his glass down. I nearly choked on my drink. "What? How did she get your number?" "She found it in your old desk, I think. She told me I was interfering. She said I was a bad influence on your family values." He grinned, but there was a sharp edge to it. "She thinks BSL is a club we use to lock her out. She doesn't understand it's a door she refuses to walk through." "I'm sorry, Marcus. I'll tell her to stop." "Don't bother," he signed, waving it off. I blocked her. "I don't have time for people who see my language as a weapon." "But your dad, how is he? He's better?" I signed, but he told me he's known for years that she didn't care. That's the part that sticks in my throat, as he spent a decade being polite to someone who treated him like a piece of furniture. On Saturday, I went back to the house to pick up the last of my books. Sarah was there, sitting at the dining table with a stack of BSL flashcards. She looked exhausted, her hair a mess, coffee stains on her shirt. "I can sign family now," she said, her voice raspy. She made the sign, the circles with the F hands. She did it correctly, but her face was full of resentment, not joy. "That's great, Sarah," I said, moving past her to the bookshelf. "Is that all? Just that's great?" She stood up, knocking a card onto the floor. "I am killing myself trying to learn this impossible language, and you won't even look at me. I'm doing exactly what you asked." I turned around, clutching a stack of novels. "I never asked you to learn it for me, Sarah. I wanted you to want to learn it for him. There's a difference. If I have to hold a gun to your head to make you care about my father, then the relationship is already dead." "I was a good wife," she screamed. "I did everything. I managed the bills. I organized our social life. I kept this house perfect. And you're throwing it away because of some silent hobby?" The word hobby hit me like a physical blow. I dropped the books on the floor. "A hobby? Sarah, it's his life. It's my first language. It's the way I told my mother I loved her before she died. It's not a hobby like your painting or your tennis. It's who we are." I realized then that she truly viewed my culture as an inconvenience, a quirk that she had tolerated tolerated as long as it didn't interfere with her comfort. The moment it required effort, it became a burden. The moment it became a barrier to her gossip, it became a handicap. I left the rest of the books. I didn't need them. I drove straight to my dad's. When I arrived, the front door was unlocked. I walked into the kitchen and stopped. My dad was sitting at the table, and Marcus was across from him. They weren't signing about the weather or the garden. My dad was signing a long animated story about my mother, about the time they got lost in the Highlands and had to stay in a tiny B&B where the owner thought Dad was a foreign spy because he wouldn't speak. Marcus was leaning in, laughing so hard his shoulders were shaking, signing quick questions back. My father looked alive. He looked like a man who was finally being heard in his own home. He wasn't waiting for me to bridge the gap. He wasn't a passenger in the conversation, and he was the pilot. I stood in the doorway for a long time just watching them. I didn't interrupt. For the first time in my adult life, I didn't feel the weight of responsibility to translate. I didn't feel like a human hearing aid. Eventually, my dad spotted me. He beamed and signed, "Son, come." Marcus was just telling me about the time he tried to sign to a police officer and ended up getting a lift home in the back of a van. I sat down. We talked for hours. No apps, no flashcards, no resentment, just the fluid, beautiful dance of hands in the air. Later that night, after Marcus left, my dad handed me a small yellowed envelope. It was a letter my mother had written to him shortly after they met. It was written in English, but on the back she had sketched out hand positions for a poem she was learning to sign for him. Your mother never saw it as a chore. My dad signed, his eyes misty. She saw it as a secret language just for us. You deserve that too. Don't go back to the silence, son. It is too cold there. I stayed the night in my old room. For the first time in years, the family gossip didn't feel like a burden to carry. It was just a story, shared between people who actually cared to listen. The legal proceedings for the separation began 2 months later. Sarah didn't go quietly. She hired a solicitor who tried to argue that my sudden departure had caused her emotional trauma and that I was withholding familial communication as a form of control. Seeing those words on a formal document, the idea that my refusal to be a free 24/7 translator was somehow an act of domestic abuse, made my blood run cold. I met her and her lawyer in a cramped glass-walled office in central London. Sarah sat across from me, clutching a leather-bound notebook. When the meeting started, she didn't look at her lawyer. She looked at me and signed, "Please, home, come." Her form was stiff, her thumb was in the wrong place for the sign for home, and she looked like she was performing a rehearsed trick. It was a performance for the lawyers, a way to show she was trying. "I see you've been practicing," I said, my voice flat. "I have a tutor now," Sarah said, reverting to speech immediately. "3 times a week. I'm exhausted, but I'm doing it. Doesn't that count for anything? I'm willing to change the entire way we communicate just to have you back." "You're willing to change because you're lonely," I replied. Not because you finally realized my father is a person worth talking to. If we got back together, how long before the lessons stopped? How long before you started forgetting to sign at dinner again because it's too much effort after a long day at work?" Her solicitor cleared his throat. "My client feels that the breakdown of the marriage is based on a singular fixable issue. She is demonstrating an extraordinary commitment to bridging the linguistic gap." I looked at Sarah. "The gap isn't linguistic, it's a gap of empathy. My dad had surgery 3 weeks ago. Did you call the hospital? Did you send a card? Or did you just wait for me to text you the update so you could tell your friends at the tennis club that your poor father-in-law was recovering?" Sarah's face turned a blotchy red. "I didn't want to intrude. You told me to stay away. I told you I wanted a separation. I didn't tell you to stop being a decent human being. You had 12 years to build a relationship with him that didn't involve me. You chose not to." The meeting ended with no resolution, just more paperwork. I walked out into the cold afternoon air, feeling a strange mix of pity and fury. I took the tube down to my dad's place. When I arrived, the house was full of light. My aunt was there, the gossip who had started this final avalanche. She was sitting on the sofa, her hands flying at a mile a minute. My dad was leaning forward, his eyes bright, responding with sharp, witty counters. Marcus was there too, helping my dad organize his new heart medication into a weekly pill minder. The atmosphere was thick with the kind of rapid-fire, effortless communication I had craved for my entire marriage. There were no pauses for translation. No one was looking at their phone. No one was waiting for the hearing person to give them permission to participate. My aunt looked at me and signed, "You look thin. Are you eating, or are you too busy being a bachelor?" "I'm eating fine, Auntie," I signed, pulling up a chair. "Just busy with the lawyers." She scoffed, a sharp, dismissive wave of her hand. "That woman, she called me, you know." "Sarah." I froze. What did she want? She wanted to know about the divorce in the family, the one she heard about. She asked me to write it down for her in an email because she couldn't understand me on the video call. My aunt rolled her eyes so hard I thought she'd see the back of her skull. I told her if she wants the tea, she has to learn to boil the water. Then I hung up. My dad chuckled, a soft vibrating sound in his chest. "She is persistent," he signed. "But she is like a person trying to watch a movie through a keyhole. She only wants to see the parts that interest her. She doesn't want to sit in the theater." That was the perfect description. Sarah wanted the highlights, the drama, and the social standing of having a diverse family, but she didn't want the quiet, mundane reality of it. A few weeks later, the divorce was finalized. I kept the flat, she kept the house. On the day I went to collect the very last of my things, mostly just some old photos and a box of my mother's belongings, I found Sarah sitting on the porch. She looked different. The effort had evaporated. There were no flashcards, no apps. "I quit the lessons," she said as I walked up the driveway. "I figured," I said. "It's too hard," she snapped, her old bitterness returning. "It's a whole different way of thinking. It's exhausting to have to look at someone's face all the time just to know what they're saying. I like to be able to talk while I'm doing other things. I like normal conversation." "I know you do," I said. "That's why we were never going to work." "I hope you're happy," she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "I hope you and your silent little club are very happy together." I didn't answer. I just took my box and walked to the car. As I drove away, I thought about the first time I ever introduced her to my dad. I remembered how he'd looked at her with such hope, how he'd practiced a special sign for welcome just for her, and he'd spent 12 years being normal for her, shrinking himself down so she wouldn't have to grow. I went back to the community center that evening. I wasn't teaching. I was just there to help Marcus with a fundraiser. As I watched the room full of people, deaf, CODA, hearing learners, all of them moving their hands in a beautiful, chaotic symphony, I felt a profound sense of peace. My father arrived a little later. He walked in, saw me across the room, and signed, "I am glad you are here. I am glad we are both here." I signed back, "Me too, Dad. Me too." For the first time in my life, I wasn't anyone's bridge. I was just a son, finally home. The transition from the house we shared to my new life didn't happen in a single moment. It happened in the small, quiet realizations that followed the divorce. For months, I had been braced for a fight, for more legal threats or tearful phone calls. But after that final day on the porch, Sarah Sarah simply faded. Without the audience of our marriage, her interest in my culture, my father, and even our history together seemed to evaporate. I moved into a permanent flat in East London, closer to the community center. It's a bright space with big windows and, most importantly, an open-plan kitchen. In a signing household, you learn quickly that walls are the enemy of conversation. You need sightlines. You need to be able to see someone's hands while they're chopping onions or making tea. One Saturday, about 6 months after the papers were signed, I invited my father and Marcus over for dinner. I was making a slow-cooked lamb stew, a recipe my mother used to make on Sundays. The smell of rosemary and garlic filled the air, and for the first time in over a decade, I didn't feel the frantic need to check if everyone was included. Marcus arrived first, carrying a bottle of red wine and a new book on deaf history he wanted to show my dad. He looked around the flat and smiled. "It feels like you," he signed, leaning against the counter. "No shadows." "No shadows," I agreed, "and no subtitles needed." When my father arrived, he looked healthier than I'd seen him in years. The surgery had been a success, but the real change was in his eyes. The guarded patient look he'd worn like a mask around Sarah was gone. He walked straight to the stove, lifted the lid, and closed his eyes to take in the steam. "Just like your mother's," he signed, his face softening. "She used to burn the carrots, though." "I don't do that." We sat at the table for hours. There was no TV in the background, no one scrolling through a phone, just the rhythm of hands moving in the light of the overhead lamp. We talked about everything: the upcoming local elections, Marcus's new project at the center, and memories of my childhood. At one point, my father looked at me, his expression becoming serious. "I saw her," he signed. I paused with my fork halfway to my mouth. "Who?" "Sarah," he nodded. "Last Tuesday. I was at the park near the old house. She was with a man, a hearing man. They were talking very fast, very loud. She looked relieved. I felt a small pang in my chest, but it wasn't jealousy. It was a strange kind of validation." "Did she see you?" "Yes." Dad signed. "She waved, a small wave. She didn't come over. She didn't try to sign. She just kept walking." He reached across the table and patted my hand. "It is better this way, son. She found her normal, and you found your voice again. I was worried you had forgotten how to use it for yourself." That hit me harder than any of the arguments I'd had with Sarah. I realized I had forgotten. I had spent 12 years being a shadow, a bridge, a tool for someone else's convenience. I had been so focused on making sure Sarah wasn't left out that I had ended up leaving myself out of my own life. Later that evening, Marcus and I were cleaning up the kitchen while my dad started a game of solitaire at the table. Marcus was drying the dishes, and I was putting them away. "You know," Marcus signed, pausing with a plate in his hand, "I never told you this, but the first time I met you at the center, and I thought you were deaf. Not because of your signing, your accent is perfect, but because of how you listen. You listen with your whole body. Most hearing people only listen with their ears. They're lazy." I smiled. "I had a good teacher." "You did," he signed, glancing at my dad. "But you also have a lot to say. I'm glad you're finally saying it." As the weeks turned into months, the family gossip Sarah had been so desperate to hear finally reached its conclusion. The cousin's divorce was settled, the hidden accounts were found, and the family moved on to the next drama. I never told Sarah. I never sent her a single update. I heard through the grapevine that she eventually married the man my dad saw in the park. Apparently he's a corporate lawyer who loves to talk about his golf handicap. I hope they're happy. Now I hope they have long, loud conversations about things that don't require them to truly look at one another. My life is different now. It's quieter in terms of decibels, but infinitely louder in terms of connection. My father and I have started taking a BSL poetry class together on Thursday nights. It's challenging and beautiful. A way of using the language that goes beyond just getting information. It's art. The other night, I was sitting on my balcony watching the lights of the city. My phone buzzed. It was a video call from my dad. I swiped to answer, and there he was, sitting in his favorite armchair. "I found your mother's old scarf," he signed, holding up a faded silk wrap. "It still smells like her perfume. I thought you might want it for your new place." "I'd love it, Dad." I signed. "Good. Come for lunch tomorrow? I'll make the tea. You bring the gossip." I laughed, my hands moving fluidly in the cool night air. "I'll be there." I ended the call and looked out at the horizon. I thought about the 12 years I'd spent trying to force a connection where there was no ground for it to grow. I thought about the handicap Sarah thought we had, and the secret world she thought we were hiding. It wasn't a secret. It was just a language of the heart. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't need anyone to translate how happy I was.